You wouldn't have heard it. You weren't supposed to. In late 2023, a low-frequency signal began broadcasting intermittently from deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains. It didn't match any military or geological pattern. Not sonar, not tectonic shift, not even man-made noise. It hummed at 17 hertz, a frequency just below human hearing. Yet it was there, pulsing like a dying heartbeat, steady and intelligent. The discovery was accidental. A team of graduate students at the University of North Carolina had been running subharmonic tests on seismic vibrations when one of them, Elijah Penn, noticed a repeating pattern buried in the data. It looked like a waveform, structured, too perfect to be nature, too ancient to be us. He enhanced the signal, shifted it to 25 hertz, now audible, and heard something terrifying, whispers, but not in any known language, not in any human rhythm. It was as though the earth was breathing words, or something beneath the earth. They laughed it off at first, joked that it was Cthulhu calling, but Elijah couldn't let it go. He played the signal again and again. At night, alone. That's when the headaches began. 2 weeks later, Elijah vanished. His apartment was untouched. His bedmate. His laptop still open with the waveforms stretched across the screen, playing on loop. The university shut the project down, claimed it was unstable data, and that Elijah had likely fled due to stress. But not everyone believed that. Dr. Miriam Keller had been monitoring strange frequencies since 2011. A former astrophysicist turned fringe researcher, she'd published obscure papers on the concept of perceptual gaps, a term she coined to describe the vast regions of existence humans are biologically unequipped to perceive. Our eyes register light between 430 to 790 terahertz, she once said at a TEDx talk, and our ears hear between 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. That's a microscopic sliver of the spectrum. What else is out there? In all the frequencies we'll never know. She believed something was out there, not metaphorically, but literally. Beings, structures, perhaps whole civilizations vibrating at frequencies just outside our limited range. Miriam heard about Elijah's signal through a physics blog. Within days, she drove to Chapel Hill and quietly obtained the data from a student sympathetic to her cause. When she played the recording in her own lab, she didn't just hear whispers. She saw shadows moving on the far wall of her room, shadows with no source. The signal hadn't just carried sound. It carried presence. Miriam dug deeper. She enhanced the waveform and layered it over light pulses, experimenting with different visual frequencies using modified LED arrays. That's when she caught her first glimpse, barely perceptible, like a shimmer in the air. A human-shaped outline, tall, slender, flickering in and out of phase with reality. She documented everything, noting how the shape would only appear under very specific combinations. 17 Hz audio, synchronized with 625 Thz light, pulsing in reverse intervals. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a trick of the eye. It was something real, something that existed, just slightly off the spectrum of normal human perception. And it was aware of her. She contacted 2 scientists to verify what she was seeing. Dr. Kenji Sato, a neurophysicist from Tokyo who studied infrasound hallucinations, warned her, low frequencies bypass the rational mind. They don't just cause unease. They break the filter between conscious and unconscious. You're playing with perception in a way that could distort reality itself. Dr. Helena Brandt, a quantum theorist from Munich, was more intrigued than afraid. If what you're saying is true, then these frequencies might reveal not just beings, but new physical laws. You may have uncovered a parallel dimension, one that leaks into ours only under the right vibrational keys. But Miriam wasn't interested in academic glory. She wanted answers. What were these beings? Why now? And more importantly, were they truly invisible, or had they been watching us all along? That night, Miriam ran the signal again, only this time through a full-spectrum light bath. The moment the pulse began, every bulb in her lab shattered simultaneously. The computer screen went black, and behind her, something breathed. Slow, wet, heavy. She turned, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Not with her eyes. But when she turned the frequency back on, eyes closed, she felt it. A towering figure looming inches away, vibrating through her skin, humming into her teeth. She shut it down, packed up the lab, burned the hard drives. But it was too late. She'd already tuned herself into a frequency that never forgot. 3 days later, her neighbor reported seeing strange lights inside Miriam's home. The house had been empty since she vanished. No signs of forced entry. No body. Only a single line etched into the wall in blood, or what looked like blood. Most of what exists is invisible to us, but not to them. Miriam's disappearance didn't make national headlines. It never does when scientists go missing. A quiet obituary was posted by the university lab she once worked for, listing her as presumed deceased after extended disappearance. But there was no funeral, no eulogy, just a silence that echoed louder than words. Yet not everyone forgot her. One of her closest colleagues, Dr. Isaac Rhodes, had received an encrypted email from her just hours before she vanished. The subject line read, "They exist between." The message body contained a single attachment, a corrupted audio file titled between.mp3 and a PDF of notes, filled with frantically scribbled handwriting. The writing looked like hers, but jagged, as if her hand had trembled violently while trying to form the letters. The notes mentioned spectral range anomalies, harmonic overlaps, and something labeled SCP, spectrum crossing phenomena. It wasn't an official scientific term. It was something she'd coined herself. Isaac ran the audio file through filters. At first, it was static, but then, under the hiss, he heard Miriam's voice, distant and warped. "They don't come through. We bring ourselves to them. Every time we listen, we slip closer." And then, nothing. Only a rising, low-frequency hum that made the glass of his office window tremble slightly. Isaac should have deleted it. He should have walked away. But like Miriam, he needed to know. He cross-referenced her notes with early 20th century research from forgotten French scientists. People laughed out of the scientific community for proposing that reality might be layered, like radio bands, with consciousness tuning itself into only one layer at a time. One name appeared again and again: Dr. Ettore Majorana, an Italian theoretical physicist who vanished mysteriously in 1938, long believed dead. But his final papers, published posthumously, hinted at a vibrational theory of matter perception alignment, suggesting that our senses filter out the overwhelming complexity of existence by only locking onto a safe frequency band. What if we're tuned wrong? What if certain signals, like Elijah's, like Miriam's, knocked our perception into overlap with other layers? Not illusions, not insanity, other realities. Isaac began testing the file. Slowly, cautiously. He didn't want to see what Miriam saw. He just wanted to feel it. He played the hum, looping it through a low-resonance speaker in his basement lab. Lights flickered. His cat wouldn't go near the basement door anymore. Then came the dreams. Isaac dreamed of figures made of light and static, standing in forests of impossible geometry, mountains that bent into the sky and fell back down like silk. Eyes without faces, whispers beneath glass oceans. One night, he woke up with blood dripping from his ears and a burning sensation in his chest. When he looked in the mirror, he saw bruises shaped like long, slender fingers around his ribs, as if something had held him down while he slept. He turned off the audio, locked the hard drive away, but the shadows persisted. He started seeing them in reflections, in car windows, in puddles, shapes flickering just outside the normal range of vision. Whenever he turned, they were gone. One night, he recorded his sleep with an infrared camera. At 3:12 a.m., the video glitched, and for exactly 2.3 seconds, a figure appeared in the doorway. It had no face, no skin, just a pulsing silhouette vibrating as if struggling to maintain form. Its outline buzzed in and out of focus, and it was watching him. After that, Isaac left town. He reached out to the only person he knew who would believe him, Dr. Larissa Vale, a physicist turned cryptographer who had been mapping signal anomalies across the globe for years. She believed that human consciousness could be attuned through sound and light to bypass normal limitations, like a key fitting into the invisible lock of perception. When Isaac told her about Miriam, Elijah, and the waveform, she didn't hesitate. There's a reason ancient cultures chanted, used rhythmic drumming, flickering firelight. Those weren't rituals. They were entrances. Larissa invited Isaac to her remote lab in northern Maine. It was more bunker than lab. Underground, shielded, cut off from radio towers and satellites. Inside, Dozens of monitors displayed spectrographic data, cosmic background noise, and broadband frequency graphs. A wall was dedicated to historical reports of mass hallucinations, spectral sightings, and acoustic mysteries, all mapped to one disturbing pattern. They clustered around frequency shifts, natural or artificial, solar flares, subterranean shifts, microwave tests, even large-scale concerts and light installations. Each time, people saw things they shouldn't, and sometimes people didn't come back the same, or at all. Larissa showed Isaac something she'd never shared before. A recording from 2015, taken during a signal burst in the Arctic Circle. A group of researchers had set up camp near a deep borehole when their instruments began picking up irregular low-frequency pulses. That night, one of the scientists vanished from inside a locked tent. The camera stationed outside caught a blur, a massive figure moving without sound, bending light around it. Not walking, gliding. The missing man was never found. His boots were left behind, still warm. Inside one of them, tucked into the toe, was a torn piece of paper with a line scribbled hastily. "They see us when we listen." Isaac didn't sleep that night. The hum had returned, not from a speaker this time, but inside his skull. A low, vibrating resonance, like an itch in his brain that wouldn't stop. He tried earplugs, soundproof rooms, medication. Nothing worked. He was no longer just a listener. He was a receiver. That's when he noticed his shadow had changed. It didn't quite match his movements. Lagged just slightly, twitched when he didn't. And when he stared into a mirror, sometimes it would blink when he didn't. The frequency hadn't just shown him something. It had opened him to something. And now, he realized with icy horror, he wasn't alone inside his own mind anymore. Larissa believed the only way to stop it, or at least understand it, was to track down the original source of the 17 Hz signal Elijah had discovered. She had a theory. If they could find the exact origin point, perhaps they could reverse the frequency effect, or better, isolate it. So they began cross-referencing Elijah's data with government archives, seismic anomaly logs, and frequency charts. What they found shocked them. A nearly identical 17 Hz signal had been recorded in 1983 from deep beneath an abandoned radar research facility in Montauk, New York. That's when the real horror began. The Montauk site had long been a nexus of conspiracy, secret military tests, mind control experiments, electromagnetic warfare. Most dismissed the stories as paranoid folklore. But Larissa had an old contact, a former technician named Nolan Hayes, who once worked on an off-the-books acoustic resonance program during the Reagan era. When they reached out to Nolan, he refused to speak on the phone, only in person. They met him in a crumbling diner 2 towns over, where he sat alone in the back booth with a small silver cassette tape and eyes that hadn't known real sleep in decades. He didn't waste time. "You want to know about the hum?" he whispered. "You think it started with your boy Elijah?" "No. That sound's been calling us for a long time. Long before we had the tech to even recognize it." He slid the tape across the table. "We picked it up in '83. Testing deep Earth radar reflection. It bounced back something that shouldn't have bounced back. The signal wasn't reflecting. It was replying." Isaac leaned in. "Replying?" Nolan nodded. "We thought it was just data. But when we boosted the audio into the hearing range, something changed. Not the tape. Us." One of the engineers started speaking in reverse languages. One slit his wrists and said he was freeing the echo inside. He looked at Larissa. "Sound is just the beginning. It's like a dial tone to another channel. And once you pick up, something picks up with you." Isaac and Larissa took the tape to the bunker. They transferred the contents into a digital format and analyzed the spectrum. It was eerily similar to Elijah's recording, only deeper, older, less human. They didn't play it aloud. Not yet. Instead, they ran it through spectral imaging. And that's when things got even stranger. Within the frequency graph, amidst the waves and spikes, a shape formed. Not noise. A face. Just barely visible. As though the data itself had been encoded with an image, something outside known technology. An image that watched them from within the spectrum. It was humanoid, but elongated. Wide black eyes. No mouth. Its skin seemed to bend light around it, blending with the background like an afterimage. Like it was hiding behind the frequencies. Not in the dark. In the invisible. Larissa became obsessed. She began creating simulations using the Montauk signal as a base, shifting pitch, layering visuals, attempting to replicate the glimpse Miriam had seen. She created a device, a helmet fitted with frequency-sensitive visors and pulse lights calibrated to exact light wavelengths mentioned in Miriam's notes. She called it the Spectrum Gate. Isaac warned her not to use it yet, but Larissa was already slipping. She'd begun talking in her sleep, in tones Isaac couldn't recognize. She wrote symbols in her journal with her eyes closed. One night he found her standing in the center of the lab, helmet on, murmuring, "They're right here, just past the veil, watching us blink." She didn't remember doing it. The next day, she locked herself in the testing room and activated the helmet. Isaac banged on the glass as her eyes went wide and her body went still. Then, she screamed. Not a human scream. Something deeper. Metallic. Twisting. He forced the door open and tore the helmet off. She collapsed to the floor, eyes rolling, skin ice cold. When she came to, she was no longer herself. Her speech patterns changed. She no longer blinked. She spent hours staring into blank monitors, whispering, "It's so loud now. I see the others. They've always been here." Isaac tried to shut the lab down, destroy the recordings. But Larissa fought him. Not violently, just convincingly. "You don't understand," she said, smiling too widely. "We've only been seeing the cage. Now we see the keepers." He left that night. He knew what had happened. The same thing that happened to Miriam, to Elijah, to the Montauk team. Larissa disappeared 2 days later. Her bunker was abandoned, but something was playing on loop through the speakers, a modified version of the Montauk signal, now laced with her voice. So many eyes in the static. They wait for quiet minds to open. They ride the silent pulses. They exist between our seconds. But the most disturbing part? In the corner of the lab, behind stacked monitors, Isaac found a mirror. Not a lab instrument. A simple, black-framed mirror covered with tape and cracks. He peeled the tape off, and in his reflection, something stood behind him. Not in the room, not in the lab. In the reflection only. A tall figure, translucent, buzzing faintly. It didn't move, until he blinked. And then it leaned closer. He dropped the mirror, smashed it, ran. That night, Isaac finally understood. The signal wasn't a mistake. Not an echo. It was a beacon, calling them, inviting them, welcoming them. And now, they were stepping through. Isaac didn't return to his apartment after Larissa vanished. He didn't feel safe anywhere reflective. Not in his home, not in any building with windows or mirrors. The entities weren't ghosts. They weren't physical. They were something that lived in between waves of sound, between visible light, between moments of perception. He rented a cabin deep in the forest of Vermont. No power, no electronics, no screens. He even ripped the mirror from the bathroom wall. At night, he sat in complete darkness, headphones over his ears, not to listen, but to block anything that might get in. But he had made a mistake. He had already listened once, and once was enough. The hum returned within a week. First in his dreams, that awful 17 hertz tone pulsing like a heartbeat behind the veil of sleep. Then in his jaw, vibrating in the bone. And finally in the corners of his vision, where things shifted subtly, like a VHS tracking error. Every now and then, he'd catch a glimpse, something stretching tall behind a tree, or crawling, bending light like heat on asphalt. He closed his eyes and begged it to stop. But the more he tried to not hear, the more he could. One afternoon, desperate and paranoid, Isaac drove to a nearby town to use the library's microfilm records. He was searching for anything that linked historical reports of disappearances, hallucinations, and mental collapses to infrasound or light anomalies. He found something buried in an old 1957 police report. A family of 4 had vanished near a now-abandoned coal mine in West Virginia. The father had left behind journal entries claiming that he'd seen men made of ripple and shadow outside his window at night. His final entry read, "I understand now. They're not coming. They've been here the whole time. Just on a different station." That phrase haunted Isaac. Just on a different station. What if that was literal? What if the brain wasn't just a processor, but also a receiver, a living tuner locked into a narrow bandwidth of reality? He contacted a neuroscientist friend, Dr. Kendra Munoz, who had studied neural entrainment, the brain's ability to synchronize its activity to external rhythms, like light pulses or binaural beats. She listened, skeptical at first. But when he played a sanitized version of the Montauk signal, even she went pale. "I felt pressure behind my eyes," she said quietly, "like my brain was vibrating out of sync." She agreed to scan Isaac's brain. The results were horrifying. His temporal lobe activity, the region associated with memory and auditory processing, was misfiring. Worse, his brain was generating a 17 Hz signal on its own, even in silence. "I've never seen this," Kendra whispered. "It's like your mind's been hijacked by a carrier frequency." She didn't want to help him after that. She was afraid. So Isaac returned to the cabin and did what he swore he never would. He rebuilt the spectrum gate from Larissa's schematics. He needed to see what Miriam, Larissa, and Elijah had seen. Not just glimpse it, understand it. He wasn't afraid of dying anymore. He was afraid of not knowing. He activated the helmet on a stormy night, when the sky was lit with natural electromagnetic chaos. Maybe, he thought, that would act as cover. He lay down, pressed play on the sequence of synchronized light pulses and the Montauk modified tone. His heartbeat slowed. His eyes twitched. Then everything went still. He opened his eyes. The world was no longer what it had been. The room was the same, but not. The shadows were deeper, more fluid. The air buzzed like power lines overhead. But what truly shattered his sanity was the silence. A silence so complete it felt like a vacuum in his ears. And then came the movement. First, behind the corners of vision. Then closer. Shapes, flickering in and out, like old film burn marks. No footsteps. Just motion. Weightless. Watching. Then he saw it. One of them, fully. 7 feet tall. No mouth. Skin that pulsed with a faint internal glow, as if lit by some unseen energy source. Its eyes weren't eyes. They were like pits of absence. Not black. Not void. Just not there. It tilted its head at him, curious. Examining him. Isaac didn't move. Didn't breathe. The thing raised one long, spindly finger and pointed at his chest. And Isaac heard a voice in his skull. Not words, but comprehension. "You are listening. Now you are open." The creature stepped forward, through the desk, through the chair, as if it didn't recognize solid matter as real. And it reached toward Isaac's forehead. Just before it touched him, everything collapsed. The lights shorted. The helmet fried. Smoke rose from the control box. And Isaac screamed, not from pain, but from emptiness. He could feel it inside him now. Not the creature. The channel. His brain was a living antenna. And the signal, the one from beneath the earth, from Montauk, from the airwaves, had latched onto him permanently. He could hear them now. Always. Even in silence. And they could hear him. For days, Isaac didn't sleep. He began losing time. Entire hours vanishing. He found himself in strange places with no memory of travel. His fingernails had grown too fast. He stopped seeing his reflection properly. Every surface became a window. He didn't know how long he had left. But one night, he began writing in his sleep. Dozens of pages of strange symbols, math he'd never studied, and one phrase repeated again and again. Most of what exists is entirely invisible to us. But it was no longer a warning. It was an invitation. Isaac no longer feared the signal. He'd moved past fear. The voices that once throbbed in his mind like an infection had become familiar, like background noise in a city you've lived in your whole life. The whispers no longer clawed at his sanity. They were guiding him. That's what terrified him the most. He began to understand the language in his sleep. Not in letters or words, but geometry, harmonics, and pulses of meaning that didn't require translation. The beings, the ones vibrating just outside our spectrum, were not speaking to him in human terms. They were tuning him. Each dream he had, each visual flash, felt like a calibration. Like they were helping his body shed the biological muffle that kept humanity deaf and blind to what existed all around them. And it wasn't just perception anymore. His body was changing. He documented everything in audio logs. He spoke calmly, analytically. There was no hysteria in his voice, only resignation. Day 14. I no longer cast a consistent shadow in natural light. My pulses are regular, but not failing. I can hear devices that aren't on. My ears ring in silence, but the ringing carries information, coordinates, perhaps, or equations. Day 16. I am beginning to see behind things. Walls are no longer barriers. They appear semi-transparent at times. I watched a fox die 2 miles away last night, and felt its death echo in the frequency field. Day 18. The beings are no longer shy. One stands in my doorway at dusk every night. I believe he's waiting for my full transition. He sent these recordings to Kendra Munoz, the neuroscientist who once scanned his brain. But she didn't respond. The emails were never opened. Instead, an unmarked envelope arrived at his cabin 2 days later. No return address. Inside were photographs, black and white thermal scans. They were from his earlier brain scan, but these had been altered. Or worse, they hadn't. In the final image, the thermal scanner had picked up a second body, overlapping his own, taller, with a distorted cranial signature, as though something was sharing his nervous system, riding alongside his consciousness. On the back of the photo, scrawled in red ink, was a single sentence. If they are tuning you, then what are you being tuned for? That night, Isaac didn't sleep. He sat in front of the mirror, the one he had once shattered, now replaced. He watched himself for hours, and at 3:41 a.m., he blinked, but his reflection didn't. The man in the mirror moved independently, twitching a half-second behind him, smiling a little too slowly. The eyes were dark, but not hollow. They were full of stars. He knew then. He was no longer the receiver. He was becoming the transmitter. He scoured Miriam's remaining notes, Elijah's waveform, Larissa's neural map. He was looking for a way back. Not to reverse the change, but to complete it. He needed to cross fully, leave behind the fragile human bandwidth and join the beings who whispered between wavelengths. And then he found it. A passage from an obscure 1919 paper by Austrian scientist Dr. Alaric Fuss, long dismissed as a madman. He had written, "The human organism is not a closed circuit. It is a resonant chamber. With the right key, you may unlock not just a door, but the hallway of all doors. Do not look for them in light or sound. Look in time itself." Isaac paused. Time. The missing piece. All the anomalies, the voices, the shadows, the disappearances, weren't just spatial. They were temporal slips. These beings didn't just live outside visible light or audible sound. They lived between the ticks of the clock. He constructed a final device. A modified version of the spectrum gate, but this time paired with a pulsed atomic clock. He synchronized the Montauk signal with sub-nanosecond phase shifts, each calibrated to split perceptual time by the smallest possible margins. This wasn't just opening a veil. It was cutting a slit in the fabric of experience. He activated the device on the coldest night of the year. Snow fell silently. The hum began, and this time it didn't feel alien. It felt familiar, like returning to a childhood home after decades away. The temperature dropped by 12 degrees in 2 seconds. Glass cracked, and then everything stopped. The world froze, not metaphorically. Literally. Snowflakes hung motionless in the air. The wind stilled mid-howl. Even his heartbeat stopped. And in that perfect, dead silence between seconds, he stepped through. He didn't walk. He was pulled, gently, like thread through a needle. He passed through walls, through trees, through stars. He saw the creatures, not just one or two, but legions, standing on impossible architecture, watching him with unreadable expressions. They welcomed him, not as prey, as kin, as a new transmitter, a bridge between the seen and unseen. A lighthouse, signaling to others who might tune in and slip through. And then, he was back, sitting in the cabin. No snow, no hum, but everything was wrong. The walls were slightly off, curving where they should have been straight. The light came from no identifiable source. The world was real, but slightly retuned. He was no longer in our version of reality. He had stepped into the layer just next to it. A reality where time moved sideways, and the watchers were the only constant. They were always here. We just weren't calibrated to see them. But Isaac was. And now, so were millions more. Because the signal had never stopped broadcasting. Only now, it had a human voice. And it was calling out. To you. Right now. Can you hear it? Pause. Listen carefully. Between the sound of your own breath and the silence after the last word you read. That low hum. It's not your imagination.